All right, guys. So this is Namir Qureshi, and I want to welcome you to MixoChat. Today we're conversing with Hans Struzyna. Hans is a former Olympian. Now he's a realtor. He works with Keller Williams, and he sells luxury realty. He works on the buying and selling side of that. And so Hans has an incredible story because, I mean, when he was in high school, he was just an athlete. I think he was born with athleticism all around. And at some point, he decided, let me just pick up rowing. And rowing isn't one of those simple sports. I mean, it's not. It, the way I kind of think about it is, and Hans, maybe you would agree or disagree. I think rowing is one of those things. I mean, it's got to be some sort of a calling because it's not basketball, it's not baseball, it's not one of your mainstream sports where there's a lot of financial. It's not as lucrative as those main sports
Mhm.
are, but it requires a level of performance that is almost unheard of. I mean, especially when you're in the water for that long, 3 or 4 hours a day, even though you're rowing with a crew of participants, it still requires every little bit of you. And
Mhm.
so, what was the journey like for you to actually decide, let me go towards this? And did you know early on that you wanted to become an Olympian?
Yeah, well, man, I really appreciate the intro. Thanks for having me on. And just to jump right into your question, you're right. Like rowing is obviously not a mainstream sport in broader American culture. However, there was a time when it was. And where I grew up in Seattle, it's absolutely a known quantity because anyone who's been to Seattle will see water pretty much anywhere you drive or anywhere you go. You can kind of have an eye shot, or there's a lake just right over that ridge, right? And as you're driving around, you see a lot of rowing shells out on the water, so it's visible in a way that it's not in many other cities. And my family got the opportunity to take summer lessons together on Lake Sammamish, which is out near Redmond, where Microsoft is located. And we just thought it was a fun family activity, so we went down and did it. And to your point, I was athletic, but grew late, so I was kind of the small kid by junior high, basically. So basketball, football, track and field, I was good and I worked hard and I was, fast, but I was like the shortest guy on the team. And obviously that's not doing anyone any favors. Not to mention the fact that I had a bit of a complex, insecurity around how much shorter I was than everybody else. Like I remember, I think it was in junior high, trying to go shop in the men's section at one of the sporting stores that was and one, or I don't even remember what the brand was, but trying to buy men's size small, and it was still too big for me, and just feeling like totally dejected going into that school year for that reason. But anyways, I eventually found rowing and realized like, hey, I don't need to be this uh, tall, out jumping, tackling guy in rowing. Like I can be part of a team, and it matters what I can produce in the boat with my oar at my station, and how well I can mix with the other people in the boat. And I, on top of that, sort of had a bit of a talent for it, I guess, that just led me to have some decent success right out of the gate, and have some good results and mix with the team, and away I went.
That's incredible. So, a lot of people they're held back by certain I guess traits. So for instance, someone might say, you know what, I wasn't born with the ability to paint, so I'm never going to become an artist. I wasn't born with the ability to sing, so I'm never going to become a musician. In your case, you had some natural athletic ability, but you weren't tall enough. And like in that case, you found a way to kind of take that ability and express it in rowing. So, what
Mhm.
was that decision like for you? Like, did it feel like, I know you said you had some natural ability, but what
Mhm.
made you decide to go all out and commit to this arena? Did you have to go through some like trial and error? Was there the whole?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Um, so so honestly, the first year I was in rowing, so I would have been 14 or 15, right around there. Um, I didn't really like it. It was like I said, I had a knack for it. I was doing okay at it. Um, Physically, like I was performing okay. I was starting to get better and more efficient in the boat and all that sort of stuff. But it wasn't. it wasn't like a love at first sight kind of thing. And I kind of wanted to quit, to be totally honest with you, within 6 months. But I also was not like a quitter. And my dad, my mom raised me to like see things through, right? And it unless there was a really good reason, and I can reflect, I before I found rowing, I played football, and I was always kind of the one of the bigger kids or one of the normal sized kids. And then the next year I was a small kid. But there was a year specifically where I wanted to stop playing football because the coach was actually a jerk. And, my dad was like, come on, just toughen up a little bit. And I was like, no. He's like actually being a jerk. And it turns out he actually got banned from the football league because he was like hitting kids and swearing and all this sort of stuff. And a bunch of the other parents came forward after we did. Anyways, that was my understanding of like, you can draw a line, like you can actually stop something if it's bad, but we're not just going to quit because it's hard. Right. So I decided to see it through. Plus all my teammates were like, listen, you're in the fall, you're in the winter in Seattle, it's 40 degrees and raining outside. It sucks. Wait until the spring season. You have to do a spring season before you can make a judgment on the sport. So I was like, okay, fine. And at the time I wasn't going to do any other sport anyways, again, because of the size thing. So stuck with it until we got into racing season. And there's 2 seasons in rowing. There's the fall and the spring. Fall is called head racing, and head racing is like on a river or around a lake, where you go kind of single file time trial style, and you're going against the clock. Whereas the spring season is all sprint racing. So think swimming, where you have buoyed lanes and everyone just starts at the same time and you go to the finish and whoever gets there first wins. And that is what, when I did my first one of those, that was like, oh, I get it. Like, this is cool. And from then on, I realized like, this is my sport. This is what I want to do. And that's really when I started to dive into the sport and really pursue it in a big way.
That's incredible. So you were actually a little against it at first, and it's almost like you probably wanted to quit, but you're not a quitter. You come from a family of people that are resilient, and you kind of just stuck the course. And then, it was winter, it was the dead of winter, 40-degree weather. You're on the lake, you're on the river, and it's just really, really cold. But somehow your teammates said, like, look, just kind of stick it out, wait till spring, it gets much better. And you yourself, knowing that you love sports in general, you're like, all right, let me just kind of stick it through. I like that. I remember when I was in high school, I had a similar thing with wrestling. Like, I wasn't on any other sports team. And it wasn't until my senior year that I decided, let me just try wrestling out. And it was grueling. It was like 2-3 hours a day after class. And you're rolling around the mat and you're sweating with someone. And if you're bigger, I was in a heavier weight class at that time. Like, I was like, at that point, I was dealing with a guy. They didn't care what weight I was or he was. We were just kind of these two big guys rolling around the mat.
Yeah.
And it's like, what is it about that? And like, most people will never understand, like, what makes someone want to go through that level of torture and that level of pain. I mean, 40-degree weather is one thing, but being on a lake, and because water absorbs temperature, so it's got to be even colder, right? So what is it about that makes us want to actually get through it? And in your case, I guess there was just the whole mentality of, all right, I come from a line of people who don't quit. My teammates are asking me not to quit. They're saying it gets better. And suddenly, after you stuck through it, it finally came to the point when there was like a race, that's when it finally clicked in. Like, oh, this is what this is all about.
Yeah. And like everything you described is absolutely the truth in sport. And it's funny, actually, I joined the wrestling team my senior year as well.
Oh, did you? I did not know that.
Yeah. Little known fact about me is I did. A side story, my proudest moment was having a kid forfeit the match before he got on the mat with me.
Why is that?
I was lifting a lot of weights at the time, and so I was a senior, and he was a freshman. He was an overweight freshman, and his coach saw me like warming up and getting my singlet on, off to the side, and then he walks over to my coach and is like, "Yo, I'm not going to put my freshman out there against this guy." Needless to say, I'd been wrestling for like 3 weeks. I just looked intimidating. I didn't know really what I had one move, and if that didn't work, I was in trouble. But yeah, I forfeited the match. Didn't even get on the mat with me.
That is hilarious.
Yeah. Anyways, everything you said previously was totally correct and real about rowing. Although I can't say that I would have articulated it at the time, but it was definitely something I felt like, I want to give this a shot. I'm making these friends with these teammates, and I have a knack at this, and I kind of get it, and I enjoy it. So I wanted to keep diving into it. And there's certain things in life that um, are uncomfortable and are, whether it's like physically uncomfortable because it's rainy and cold and your muscles are hurting, or it's like emotionally uncomfortable because you're having an awkward conversation with somebody or what have you. And there like you just have to sort of do repetitions in order to um, train that comfort in those moments of discomfort. And that's something that I think rowing does a really good job of, is forces you to be physically uncomfortable and then continue to perform at a high level with your teammates. And for whatever reason, that was something that was appealing to me, and certainly carried me through a long way on this trajectory of Olympic rowing and all that stuff.
That's incredible. See, the thing with the hard work is that, and David Goggins talks about this, and I'm not sure you're familiar with him, but
Mm-hmm.
so you are. So like he's very big on just kind of grinding it out, and he likes to make every day suck. And there's like this whole mentality of like people want things to be easy, and it's almost like you've got this whole thing like, follow your bliss, or if you really love what you do, then you'll never ever work another day in your
Mm-hmm.
life. What I found is that it's actually the opposite. Like when you truly go after something that stretches you, it sucks and it hurts. And then you kind of have to tap into a deeper drive. And I'm
100%.
wondering for you, what was there a shift in focus? I mean, like I said, it's not easy to put out like, all right, anyone can even join a sport and just be mediocre at it. People can join the
Right.
row team and just be mediocre. Here you are. It's not the thing that you were passionate about. You never knew that you were passionate about it. It's not like you dreamt about rowing all your life up until that moment. But now you're doing this and you're pushing yourself. What was the thing that drove you? Was there something like, yeah, what was that? Why were you driven to become so like to get to the point where you were actually an Olympian?
Well, I guess to answer that question, I'll sort of answer another question that people always ask, which is like, what is the Olympic Village like?
Sure.
And it's and I'll bring it back around here. And the reason I bring this up is because there are 10,000 beds in the Olympic Village. So there's a total of 10,000 athletes that compete in the Olympic Games every summer, or every fourth summer, excuse me. And unfortunately not this year
Right.
because of COVID. But
Right.
um, the one thing that I noticed when I got there was like, of course there's some posturing and there's some like, camaraderie amongst your teammates, and you're kind of eyeballing your competition and yada yada. There's obviously fanfare when you see someone like Usain Bolt walk into the dining hall, that sort of thing. But the thing that I really noticed by and large, just walking around and looking at all the other people and all the other sports, was that they were all basically the same as us, meaning us, our team, in so much as they were just like normal people who were in good shape, but had like insecurities and had frustrations and had lives that sort of led them to want to be the best at something. And generally speaking, I think the, like, uh, I don't remember who I was having this conversation with, but there was a chip on every single shoulder in that Olympic Village, and everyone obviously came from a different place and a different reason why they were there and why they were driven to do this thing that they were so good at. But generally, like, it was something they felt like they had to prove to themselves, to others. It this may ruin the Olympic Village for people, but it's like there's a lot of like broken people in there who are trying to fill gaps in themselves by being amazing at some sport. And I'm not going to say that's necessarily everybody, but we all had insecurities and issues that led us to want to like suppress that stuff and be amazing at something else, so we could like show the world that, like, hey, I wasn't that little kid that you made fun of when I was 8. Like, I'm the Olympic athlete, so forget you, you know?
Wow. Now that's kind of like the darker side of human nature. And it can, my best to make sure that that is not what's fueling me, because I almost feel like when you go about it in that way, like I want to prove the world wrong, or, you hurt me. So now me to become the best version of myself. I, I can only imagine that. I don't know what that could do to your brain long term, or I mean, and I'm not here to judge, because I mean everyone has their own like upbringing, everyone has their own past traumas that they're trying to heal. I guess, Mike, I could ask you this though, because you've been to the Olympics. I mean, is there like this moment of euphoria where you finally feel like you've made it and like the past is resolved? Is that what a lot of these Olympians, if they experience that feeling?
Um, it's different for everybody because obviously everyone goes there to try and win a gold medal, but obviously only one person or one team does. And the regardless of how you finish, there is absolutely a moment of relief regardless of position. There's a feeling of like some sense of lightness and like just relief that it's over, to be kind of frank with you. And that means you won, you were last, whatever. It's like your entire 4 years or career or whatever it was has led you to this moment, and you've been building it up and building it up and building it up, and now it's done, right? So it's really not I guess the answer is it's not an easy, like so there's a lightness and a relief, of course, immediately then replaced with some sense of euphoria if you did well or better than expected, and then for most of us, frustration, depression, etc., if you didn't perform the way you wanted to or didn't get the result you wanted to. And to your point, it's like if you're trying to fill a hole in yourself with a performance at the Olympic Games, you're still going to be you with or without that gold medal. And that honestly took me a year and a half after the games to really come to grips with, because we went with the intention of medaling, we went with the capability of medaling, and we got fourth. And that's like one of the most painful positions, is just to be right outside the medal stand when you knew you could have been standing on it if you would have had a better performance. But you raced the race on the day, and that's how you determine the winner. And to me, it was like, okay, I've tied my entire identity up in this rowing version of myself, and now I failed at the one thing that I cared about the most, which was rowing, right? So fast forward a year and a half, you come home. I decided to take a year off, and then I was like completely aimless and lost, because again, I was so deep and tied into rowing. And then I ended up having, a life coach and a therapist, and going through a bunch of different books and other things to really start to, number one, understand that I am a rower, but I'm also many other things, and that's not the only thing I am. But also that I needed to sort of bring the younger version of myself that I was trying to basically run away from and distance myself from back into the fold, and heal internally, and accept that, smaller version who couldn't jump as high and couldn't run and play basketball and do all the other things that I did prior to rowing. And sort of accept that person before I could really sort of heal and be a whole person again, and leave rowing where as part of my life, but not my life, if that makes sense.
That's an incredible answer. I mean, I wasn't expecting that. And I guess most people never know the full gamut of someone's experience. And it's interesting. So I almost, from what I'm hearing, and this is me responding to what you said, it's like you went through this experience when you were younger where, I guess maybe it was a height or whatever. I wasn't always the tallest either. And so I kind of resonate with you in that regard. And it's like I'm 5'9". I couldn't do basketball, right? I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be a starting quarterback. Wrestling kind of made sense, and that's cool. But in your case, like some of these people who go to the Olympic Village, it's almost like they want to prove something. And maybe there's some of that with you. There's what I'm hearing is the family legacy part of it as well, because you want to
Hmm.
do well for your family, but you also you wanted something to prove, and it felt good to win. And suddenly what ended up happening was you became so attached to this identity of you being a rower, and it was almost like you were looking to that identity as a way to absolve you of any trauma. And trauma, I'm using that as a light word, I just mean whatever past
Yeah.
things that you hadn't faced. And then once you finally got through to the other side of it, it's almost sounds like in some ways that maybe ending up in fourth place was actually a very good thing, because it helped you to realize the other thing that you needed to face. What if you had gotten third, second, or first? Would that past self, would that still be unresolved? And it
Right.
sounds like after having gone through some therapy and having gone through some life coaching, you started to realize that no, there is Hans has different phases of life, and in one phase
Hmm.
he was or is an Olympian, is an Olympic rower, and that's something that you can definitely like take with you. That's part of your
Yeah.
story, but that's not the end. And I think for a lot of athletes, after they've kind of left the spotlight, they almost try to go through this period of like trying to discover who they are. And it sounds like in some ways that's what you went through as well, that you kind of came to terms with your past. And once you finally came to terms with that a year and a half later, I guess you kind of were you free at that point to build the rest of the next phase of your life? Like what happened after that?
Yeah. Well, let me maybe back up and just build a little bit more context, which
Please.
is um, we talked about the kind of small kid syndrome, and then I found rowing.
Yeah.
But I also went to a high school where my graduating class was 82, and of those 82 people, I think 30 or 35 of us had been together since kindergarten. And so talk about a really small world, right? And so I had known this very tiny little group of people for basically my whole life until I joined the rowing team. And the rowing team was a club, and so it pulls kids from all over the region. And I basically, in the matter of a year, went from knowing like 100 people in my peer group to knowing at one school to knowing all these people from all different schools, like literally every single school. Um, and as I became better at rowing, I was then also known as the kid, like I became team captain. I was known as like the rower, right? And sort of the other interesting thing here is Hans is my first name. I'm Hans Christopher because Hans is a family name, and we have a handful of Hanses as well who also have other names. And I'm the youngest Hans. Well, now one of the Hanses has his Hans, so it's confusing, right? So we all had different names growing up, and I went by Chris or Christopher. And basically, when I joined rowing, the opposite happened. There was a ton of Chris's and Christian and Kit, and there was too many of those names. So I literally we had to figure out nicknames for everyone, and then they all figured out that I was Hans Christopher, and they're like, "Yo, that's a perfect rowing name. You're going by Hans from now on at the boathouse." And so I built this identity of being a really good rower in this bigger group of people who then liked me, and I didn't have all this stigma from whatever I did in third grade. And then um coupled with that I'm like have this cool name Hans, and then I'm building all these new interesting friendships, and then I'm really doing well as a high school rower. So I built this identity and decided and basically continued to be like, yeah, this feels good, I'm going to keep doing this, and just poured into that and wanted to be the guy who was just like the best rower that anyone knew. And so obviously bring that forward to the Olympics, and then you've tied yourself up into that, and everyone you've ever met in the rowing world knows you as this amazing rower. You make the Olympic team, and it's almost like expected rather than exciting. It's like I expected to make it because I knew I was capable of it, but like I also sort of felt like everyone sort of just expected me to make it. And then, and maybe that was true, and maybe that was my own perception of it, but that's certainly how it felt. So anyways, just rounding that story out, you come out of the Olympics, and you can imagine how building that up through basically from 14 till 27 years old, like that, you know, that does something to you for better or worse, probably better and worse, to answer that part.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like I love the positivity behind it as well. I mean, so hearing this whole other side of the story where like you kind of had this close knit circle of friends growing up and you kind of knew everyone, then suddenly you became a rower and then you started meeting other people, then you became known as the rower. And it wasn't just like you becoming the rower, you were at one point Hans Christopher, and then probably just Christopher, but then there's too many Chris's, and now you're just Hans. And
Yep.
so, like, there's this whole identity being shifted and I guess crafted through this one path. And for 13 years, that's what you did, 14 to 27. And so now, what happened after all that? So, okay, you've kind of come to terms with it. It was interesting that you said that it was an expectation, and it's almost like some people who become really successful, they also say that this was an expectation of mine. Like once they finally got there, it wasn't like, oh yeah, oh my god, this is incredible. No, it's like, oh well, this is what I've been working on my entire life. Of course, this is what's going to happen. In your case, 13 years and down this path, and of course you're going to become an Olympian. But what do you do now, as like, how did you disengage from that, and what led you into deciding, all right, let me find some other avenues? Was the whole coaching thing, did that happen immediately after you left the Olympics? It was this before you became a realtor? Like, what were some of the
Yeah.
other identities and other choices you came up with after you made your peace with that past path?
Well, it took a while for sure, because I got done in August of 2016. I came back to California, and didn't have a job, didn't have a lot to do per se, but that was sort of the point. I was going to take a couple weeks and sort of collect myself, regardless of whatever the result in Rio was, and just kind of decide what was next. Because frankly, for most starting in 2012, when I got cut from the Olympic team that year, um, I really had 2016 Rio de Janeiro circled on my calendar, and I didn't even comprehend the fact that we would ever get to September of 2016, let alone 2017. So I just had no plan, like nothing. It was like sold out to the Olympics, right? And so I come back and, grappled with the frustration of the whole thing and dissected the year, and really just ultimately decided I needed to take like a year off and just kind of do some work and, do something outside of rowing, stay fit, but just, not be that, not be in that world for a little bit, and decide what I wanted to do. And as I kept reflecting on it over the months, I really just realized like, hey, I'm a guy who, like, I gave everything I had to it. I put in the work. I showed up, had the results. Like I don't think anyone can argue that I wasn't ready for that race. And I knew launching on the dock on that day, like, I am as good as I can possibly be for this race. And I honestly wasn't that nervous for the final, other than like, I mean, you get some jitters because it's the Olympic final, but I really was like, I'm ready for this. Like, this is really where I belong. Like, I've trained, I've produced the results, I'm ready. And I believe that everybody else felt something similar to some degree, although we just didn't kind of line up on the day. So then I thought, am I trying to get a medal to prove something to other people or to myself? Because I already know that I was capable of it, and it just didn't work on the day. We just didn't have a good enough teamwork. I take some responsibility for that, for not speaking up in certain opportunities. But ultimately I just realized like, hey, I needed, like, if I need external validation, I've got some serious problems here, because it's not like life's going to be tough if I'm looking for that validation all the time. So ultimately I decided, you know, medal or no medal, like it doesn't change the way that I performed and that I felt about myself as an athlete or otherwise. So ultimately I decided that after a couple of years that I wasn't going to come back, and I was going to move on and climb a new mountain. With that said, that's when some of the coaching came in, because I did start to coach some younger athletes who were starting their journeys in rowing, and try and mentor them to some degree. And I've been working with one guy specifically for over 2 years now, and he's actually not going to row, but he's made some amazing progress in 2 years, really deciding that for himself and figuring out what it all means in college and job and all that stuff. Um, but that came in as a way to sort of help and give back to some younger athletes and to other people. And then that's almost immediately when real estate came into the fold, was just a handful of weeks after I was done with Rio. Always knew I wanted to be in real estate in some capacity, and I got an opportunity to join a team remotely that was based in Southern California, and I was going to be in Northern California, which was really fantastic. For about a year, got my feet wet, got off the ground and rolling, and got a really good start to my career. And that just sort of catapulted me up this new mountain, so to speak. Like I climbed the rowing mountain, right, and got basically to the top. Didn't win the gold medal, so I guess I wasn't at the very, very top, but pretty darn close. And but then I was like, it's just like I could keep trying to climb this mountain for another 4 or 8 years and spend my 30s doing it, or I could go, try what other kind of riches the world has to offer, with travel and food and lifestyle experiences, and building a career and having a relationship and meeting new friends and new people outside of the athletic community. So that's ultimately what I decided to do.
So you actually decided to just venture out and explore different areas of your life then. And in some ways, like realty became one piece of it. And other than that, you actually did travel, you got married, you started
Mm-hmm.
meeting friends. Do you miss the level of self-discipline that you had as a rower, or did that translate over into what you do now?
It definitely took some time to really figure out how to apply the skills of self-discipline and hard work and coachability and all that stuff into the real estate profession. But it didn't take 12 years. It took like a year and a half or 2 years. And that's largely because I had so many repetitions at it in the rowing world that it just took me some time to figure out how to win at this new game, so to say. And you said something earlier at the opening of the interview, something about like people think they're not a writer, so they don't write, or they don't um do whatever. I don't know what you said, something like that, to that extent. And like that was me. Like I'm the athlete, right? I'm the
Right.
guy who knows how to be on a team and knows how to work really hard physically. But I wasn't, I wouldn't call myself a writer or an artist or any of that stuff. But what I did figure out is, what are my strengths and what am I really good at? And it's just that. It's like being a teammate, like figuring it out, like bringing 120% to everything I do. Um, and then to watch others who are successful and then dissect what they do and try and copy it or apply it to my life in some way. And so I basically had to figure out how to use those skills to find the best people in the industry or the pursuit that I wanted to get after, and basically apply what they were doing to what I wanted to do, and just move that forward. And writing is funny that you brought that up earlier, because it got me thinking. Like I started reading a lot of Mark Manson's stuff recently, and before really diving into his stuff, I always kind of was like, I'd love to write like him someday. And if I could write like anyone, it'd be like him. And, I love his satire, but I also love the depth that he brings to the subjects he talks about, and yada, yada. So, once I started really reading it, I started to realize there were patterns, there was a style there that I could follow. And I really just started to dissect it. And then all of a sudden I got inspired and wrote a blog post one day for a company that I'm helping to start. And I was like, holy crap, this is like kind of like what Mark Manson would write. And it just is. And so just to say that I took my process and the things that I knew how to do and applied it to something as what one would call creative as writing, and was able to produce a result that I was like, I don't even know where that came from. That was crazy.
That's incredible. So there's many ways I can answer that. I just kind of want to make sure I took all that in. So just to kind of back up a bit, as you started responding, you said that you've always been a team player and you were that athlete, and you found a way to take what you were as an athlete and transmute that into realty and real estate.
Mm-hmm.
And it took you about a year and a half. What I found profound about that was what you just said. It took you 13 years to become an Olympic rower, but it didn't
Mm-hmm.
take you 13 years to become good at real estate, whatever good means. But
Right.
it didn't take you because it sounds like the hard work you put in into becoming a rower somehow did translate into what you do now. It's like you didn't, even though those 13 years were dedicated to rowing, the same mindsets, the rituals, the routines, the self-discipline, it wasn't for naught. And you were able to
Yep.
take that and apply it into what you do now, which I think is phenomenal. So sounds like you found some of the right mentors, and you kind of dissected a lot of the
100%.
things along the way. Like you found out, like you said it before, and this is very zen like, and I just like, I don't have goosebumps because it's like, I'm inside, but I would have
Right.
goosebumps metaphorically speaking listening to you. Earlier you said something to the effect of, you get to the Olympic Village and there's 10,000 people there, but then you really look at them, they're just ordinary people. They're not, there is no halo, there's no like real big, I mean, sure, there's some fanfare, but these are normal people.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, they've got a lot of like darkness inside of them that they're trying to heal, and they're trying to use the
Mm-hmm.
Olympics as a way to kind of heal that. But these are normal people. When I listen to what you just said, I think of Matt Fraser. Have you heard of Matt Fraser from CrossFit?
Mm-hmm.
He has a
Mm-hmm.
similar story. Like he was at the CrossFit Games and he like worked his tail off and he won second place one year. I think it was in 2015. And then in
Mm-hmm.
the 2016 games, he didn't work as hard and he came in second place and he felt like he had lost. And it's because he didn't put in the same amount of work. And it was just one of those things where he was at the gym and he saw these people and he realized, wait a minute, you're not that much bigger than me. You're not that much taller
Right.
than me. I mean, you're just lifting weights just like I am. All right, what you're doing, I think I can do. And I think you took that same type of mentality and you applied it not just to rowing, but you also took it and applied it to real estate, in which case you saw, all right, this person over here who's got a 30-year head start on me, it doesn't matter. I mean, he still puts his pants on one leg at a time. He still
Mm-hmm.
ties his shoes. He still has his own insecurities, but he also has his own track record. What can I learn from this person? How can I dissect what I learned from them and integrate that into my own life so that I can become a better realtor? So that's
Yep.
kind of like what I'm hearing from like what you said, which go ahead.
Yeah. And I have to say, like, I cannot take, like, I definitely did the work, and going back to the Olympic thing and to the real estate thing, like I did the work, I showed up, I like learned the skills, I practiced, I pulled got in the boat and rode it. I did all the workouts. I did the reps, practicing the contract and negotiating skills, and I read books and I did that work, right? That was me physically doing it. But I also had coaches along the way, from my high school days all the way to the Olympics. I always had a coach, and honestly, probably more than one coach at a time, telling me about, fitness or nutrition or rowing technique or recovery or whatever. And along the way, I picked all these different things up and tried and applied and dropped some and picked up others. And my ability to succeed isn't like, I'm not the guy who's going to create some new technology or some new innovation. Like, that's just not me. But what I'm really good at is learning from others who are good and applying it, and then doubling down on that and bringing my ability to put effort in and to be uncomfortable to bear on that skill. And so with real estate specifically, I went and found, sort of through a mutual connection, but was able to get in contact with the number one agents in our area, and their son was a rower at the time. Had brunch with them, just connected socially, basically. And then I realized, wait a second, like I should be working with these guys. Like, and so I wrote them this big long email about like all these great characteristics I had that I could bring to their team, how I would help them, what I could take off their plates, yada, yada. And they were like kind of blown away by it. I think because they brought me in for an interview and then a second interview, and long story short, brought me in. And then as soon as I showed up, because I showed up to this established team, I did what I always did when I showed up to the under 23 team or college or the national team or whatever, is I put my head down and I absorbed and worked my butt off to get into this new group, because going into a high performing team and succeeding was not new for me. It was just the subject matter was different. And so I just had to learn and ask questions and be personable and try and support and help as much as I could. And I did that. And within 6 months, I had really established myself on that team, learned a lot, and become, exponentially better as an agent and as a business person as a result of shutting up and just trying to work hard and learn. And I will say the biggest compliment I've ever got from my team leaders is like, you are like this sponge who I've never seen anyone learn as quickly and apply it as quickly as you do. And I'm like, yeah, because that's how I made the Olympic team. Like, what do you think I was doing that all the time, right? But like, that's what I'm trying to say is like, those were the skills that I identified and then I just figured out I need to apply them sort of in a different way, in this case to real estate.
I love that. I mean, there's a lot there to unpack, but the beauty of it is that what you ultimately realized was that your greatest strength wasn't the fact that you made it to the Olympics as a rower. The one thing that you could take from your entire experience was that you had this fundamental ability to not just work hard, work incredibly hard, work as an asset to a team, but also be able to take in and absorb whatever information you needed. Because you did say you had a bunch of mentors, a bunch of coaches throughout your life. I think even your mom helped you out with nutrition throughout your life as well, right?
Yeah.
So like from your family and then everyone, all the people who were external to that, like you had people, sounds like you must have been very inquisitive throughout your life and you kind of found ways to open up doors just by being a good person and just, in this case, sending out a long email, just showing them that what you're going to bring to the table. I think that we have like a person's identity is very deep and complex, and there's many facets to what we consider to be ourself. In your case, what's interesting is that you mentioned how you were inspired by Mark Manson and you never thought that you could write like him. And then one day you decided, let me just write this blog post for this company that you're starting. And suddenly it just kind of poured out of you. And my thing is, my belief is that the people that inspire us, they inspire us because we actually see something within them that exists within ourselves. There's a potential, a raw potential. And that if I'm impressed by something that someone has done, then maybe if I'm drawn to that person, that maybe there's something within me that's also worthy or waiting to be unearthed. And in that case, it sounds like you're starting to do that. And what kind of intrigues me is one little thing you just threw out, a slight jab earlier, which was you've always been interested in real estate. How did you know that? And how far back does that story go? Like when did how did that come to be?
So I mentioned Hans as a family name. So Hans Martin Smith Jr., my grandfather was one of the top real estate developers in Seattle. He was just really well known, helped develop a lot of the skyline in Seattle through the 70s, 80s, 90s, had a huge amount of holdings. And so just that alone, I saw, his network, his reputation, his wealth, all that sort of stuff that he had built up. It was like, yeah, real estate seems cool. My uncles took over that business at some point. My dad was a real estate attorney, and he was always talking about things that his clients were doing and like buildings they were buying or selling or businesses they were a part of. And then his brother owned a handful of real estate of apartment buildings in the Philadelphia area. And I mean, not that he didn't work, he's a really fabulous architect, but like always had, his mortgages covered and that sort of thing. So it just sort of had these influences from all different directions on real estate. And for whatever reason, it just clicked. It was probably just my dad beating it in my head to at the end of the day of like, yeah, like, own your own business and buy real estate, own your own business and buy real estate. Right. Cause he wishes he would have done that, earlier than he started. But I started to see the truth in it. And I just always sort of figured like, hey, I've got these connections. I know a little bit about this business. I've been exposed to it. I can see what the payoff could be in the end, which is, financial freedom and a non-traditional 9-to-5 engagement. And frankly, I just always thought, contracts with tenants or purchase agreements were really cool. Houses and buildings are beautiful. Architecture is kind of fun. All that kind of stuff. And I knew I was a people person, and I could kind of relate to people and have, and kind of find out how to then meet the need by filling it into the house or the building or whatever. And so I guess I just always really figured I would be in that space at some point or another. I didn't know the capacity. And then the residential opportunity came up, and I actually had a commercial opportunity at the same time right after the Olympics. And I just decided I wasn't ready to go sit at a desk and wear a suit at that moment. So I took the residential one, and, it's led me 3.5 years on this path of now into this luxury real estate world.
And I love what you've done with your branding. I mean, you've got your own YouTube channel, you're posting things regularly there.
Mm-hmm.
You've got your own podcast. And so has all of that helped you with your exposure? Are more people finding you? Because I know you're about 70 or so episodes in. You've only been doing this for about a year, about, what was it, 2019, right? So it hasn't even been that long.
Yeah, I think I just launched it's whatever it is, late June. I just launched episode 85 on the podcast. I think I've got like 20 YouTube videos up. So I've got a few reps, but not, I'm by no means totally a seasoned vet here. But yeah, it started to get some exposure. I actually have a client who's writing an offer today who was a podcast guest, which is the first of hopefully many that source yields. But the exposure, absolutely. It's like everybody who's on social media with any regularity is going to see my stuff, who is in my world, and whether or not they think of, they are going to buy or sell, they see me doing stuff and they think of me as like the Bay Area real estate friend they have. And like, I've had so many conversations of people who I haven't talked to in a year or two, and they're like, I love what you're posting all the time, or how's the market or whatever. And like, those are the conversations that you constantly want to have in this business, but in really any business. So yeah, the exposure has started to come, but like, as anyone knows who started a content marketing strategy, it is a longer process than just, put out a few episodes and you get a bunch of clients, right?
Oh yeah, no, this is a long-term thing. I mean, you get 10, 15 views and you start out, but then long-term, 5 years, 6 years out, suddenly there's like this, I guess a flip or a switch that flips, and suddenly like you have thousands of views. You just kind of have to play the long haul. And I'm pretty sure like you're 31, right? So by the time you're 35, 36, I'm sure this will be pretty big.
And that's the thing, going back to the real estate, right? It's like, going back to even rowing, like there's a minimum amount of time it takes to do anything. Like, let's forget rowing for a second and talk about marathon running. Everybody knows marathons, right? Like, even if you've never run one, you know what it is. So the world record just, I think last year was set and got under 2 hours finally.
Okay.
It was hovering just above 2 hours for a really, really long time, and now it's just under 2 hours. And what's insane about that, when you really break it down, is that human being was running at like sub 6 minute pace for 2 hours, right? Think about that, right? It's like, oh, that's really cool, 2 hours. Like, but like, think about what that takes to do for 2 hours to run sub 6 minute miles, and And so the point is, like, yes, that was incredibly fast. No one's ever run that fast ever, but it was still 2 hours, And for most of us, we're running marathons, 3 hours is super fast, but then, 4 hours, 5, 6 hours. And same thing with, losing weight in the gym or getting stronger. It's like, you're not going to go in and hit like 2 days of biceps and be pissed off when your arms aren't huge like Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? You're going to expect that it's going to take some time to build up. Well, the same exact thing is true with businesses, with marketing, with sales, with all of that stuff. Like, yes, you can have some success right out of the gate. There's absolutely nothing stopping you there. But when you lose the short-term mentality on it, which is what I had to do with rowing, because the championships are in June, it's September. Like, you can't fast forward that, right? There's time. You have to spend time to prepare for it. When you apply that time metric and put that in your favor, that's when you start to build a career and a momentum behind you that gets really exciting if you break it down like that and don't quit after 4 episodes.
And like, you're a testament to that process. I mean, what was it, 80 something episodes? Is that where you are now with the
85? I think 86 is going out on Thursday. So yeah,
86
along.
That's incredible. You've been consistent with that. You've got a bunch of YouTube videos up, and I'm sure you're going to keep plumbing away with that. Mm-hmm. You don't get huge biceps like Arnold Schwarzenegger overnight. And I guess what's your goal with this? Like, I know with the Olympics, with the rowing, you can enter the Olympics. There's no Olympics for real estate. There's like, the sky's the limit. Yeah. So what exactly do you want to do with this?
What's interesting, and I'll tell you this story real quick, is for the longest time, I had this obsession with making 6 figures. Like, basically when I got done rowing, I wanted to make 6 figures. Like, that's like a big mark that everyone wants to hit, financially. And so I was like, man, if I could just make 6 figures, like, everything would be great. I would be rolling in it. It'd be awesome. And like, I've made it at 6, right? 6 figures, 100 grand. And I remember last May, I had a huge month. I had 3 sales, one of which was $3 million sale. So and the other 2 were well over $1 million. So I had a big month. I sold more that month than I did my first 18 months in the business in dollar value, which is crazy, right? And I'm sitting there on a Wednesday in my back little patio area barbecuing something. I open up my app on my phone and I see the commission checks had all been deposited in there. And I had like 60 or 70,000 in the bank at that time. And most of it was obviously those commissions. And I was like, huh. And it like hit me that I was definitely going to break 6 figures because it was May and I had a pretty decent pipeline still. And I had just made whatever was 60 or something. So I was like over halfway there in 1 month, plus whatever I'd done previously in the year. So I was like, it's like going to happen unless I stop working immediately. And it just hit me of like, the money isn't it anymore. It's not. It's like, yeah, money's cool. And, having those sort of metrics of income and hitting different production levels is awesome. And you should absolutely have those kinds of goals. But it deflated me for a little while because I thought it would have more meaning than it actually did. And so to your point about there's no Olympics in real estate, that's totally right. But what I will say in that moment that I shifted towards, I was like, I understand why people talk about wanting to help people and want to perform for people and help them achieve their goals. Because while the financial rewards are awesome, really, like yesterday, I had a client who were getting done on their second transaction they bought and then they had to sell. They were like, listen, I don't know what I was expecting when we started working together, but you've like blown that out of the water by 100 times. Like, I've never seen a work ethic like yours. And we are just you're getting all of our referrals forever and yada, yada, yada. And I was like, that felt better than any commission check I've ever earned. And to know that I just like knocked it out of the park and blew their socks off with what I could offer them. And, so to answer your question more directly now about the Olympics, like that to me is the new Olympics, is like achieving that for every single person that I go to work with.
That's beautiful, because I guess that's really what it is. It's meaning, finding meaning in whatever that you do. In terms of the Olympics, your meaning was, you love this thing. You wanted to become the best version of yourself. You wanted to kind of say like I told you so because da 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 I wasn't tall enough. But there's also the fact that hey, this is my identity and expectation that I'm going to become an Olympic rower, and you did
Hmm.
that. But now that's a very external goal. I mean, sure, that's a once in a lifetime where I guess you can go multiple times, but you
Hmm.
chose to do it once, and then it's kind of like you're sitting there. You just sold like $5 million worth of houses in a single month. You finally get the commission check in. It's like $70,000. You're definitely going to hit your six-figure goal, but it was very deflating because it seems like there's a lot of meaning tied up in that money, but it just wasn't quite there.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it's all back to people. Like I said, I identified early on that I was a people person, and I had a professor, I think my sophomore year in college. He was a communications class, and he was teaching about the Communications Act in 1974, I believe. I could be butchering that date. I don't know. But the point was, someone in the class was like, "That's so random. Why would you say it? Like, why is that?" And he's like, he stopped the lesson plan. He's like, in front of the 100-person classroom, he's like, "I hate the word random." And he went on it. He like dumped the lesson plan and talked to us for the entire rest of the class about why nothing in this world is random. And and his point was, it's all built the way, or it's designed the way it is because someone made it that way. Whether it's a sign, whether it's a commercial, whether it's a piece of furniture, like someone designed it to serve a purpose. And then he tied it back into communications and, radio stations being bought and sold and yada yada. But it stuck with me. It's like, okay, it's all people. It's like people business, people decisions. Like the real estate is just the vehicle to get people to where they want to go. And that honestly made a like tying all that together over a handful of years made me realize like it's all, serving people and trying to get them to their goals or get them out of a bad situation or whatever the case was. That really intrigued me the most and has kind of fueled me for the last year and change on the content strategy, like putting out the YouTube videos and serving people that way, and trying to answer questions in the podcasts and, all the other stuff that I do. Um, and ultimately just trying to serve clients on a one-on-one basis like that. So anyways, it's just all just to say that it really ties back to people, and the fact that I identified as a people person as a very young age.
So, what is the mark that you want to leave on real estate? Because it sounds like there is a mark you want to leave. Because with the Olympics, it would have been a medal, or it's the fact that you made it. So that's the mark that
Right.
that's your lasting legacy there. In
Right.
this case, your family history is involved with real estate, and that's cool. That's incredible. So, is this like, do you want to add this to the Hans family legacy? Is there something even bigger? Like, how do you want to contribute to this? Because I feel like there's so many different ways to help people. You can become a doctor, you can become a coach, you can become a therapist, you can
Right.
become a builder. In your case, you're doing real estate and you're helping people buy and sell houses, and you're really putting your all into that. Is there is there a legacy marker there though? Like, how do you want to transfer? Because it seems like you're doing things that your typical agent isn't doing. Like most people
Mhm.
don't, even as of now, even as accessible as YouTube is, most people don't have a YouTube channel. They don't have a
That's true.
podcast. So sounds like in your case, you're kind of humanizing your brand. You're also giving them value by showing them, hey, you don't have to work that 9 to 5 thing. You can actually transcend that, become even bigger and better. How do you tie those aspects of what you're doing with the podcast and with
Hmm.
what you want to do with helping people? And how do you tie that into creating a legacy through your work as a realtor?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And to be honest, I don't know fully. I do know that I want to leave every relationship better than I found it, and that's kind of how I sign off every podcast, or make every chapter better than the last is really what I say. But um, it's, I guess it's, for part of it is I'm doing all that stuff because you need reps at it to figure it out. Like I'm not going to blow up. I don't have a following on Instagram that I can shove over onto YouTube or vice versa. Right. Like, so I need to like try and see what works for me and what people respond to and what I can serve people with and what they'll appreciate. Um, and ultimately, like, just getting out there and being willing to open up and have conversations and put yourself out there in some way, like, that is really what I want my legacy to be for the moment, is like to be defining my legacy, I guess, is figuring out how I can help others and serve people, and beyond just the real estate transactions, and hopefully through the podcast and through YouTube and maybe other businesses I start, or volunteer positions I take. But I don't think you have to have it figured out. Like, anyone who's ever started a company or started a new profession will tell you, like, I didn't know anything when I first started relative to what I know now. But like, being willing just to get out there and give it a shot, and like you said, be consistent and do the reps and put it in, and then kind of figure out where it's going as you're taking off, so to say. That's honestly what I'm really focused on right now. And I hope that through all of that, if nothing else comes out of it, that people who see it and come across it say, yeah, Hans, really tried to make an impact, small or big, on everybody's lives that ever came in contact with him, and that he gave his authentic best to all those situations. And that comes through. And if that's the only thing that they see, then I would consider that a win.
That's incredible, because you're right. You don't have to have everything figured out. Right now, you're just focusing on the problem and the moment they're trying to solve. You're giving it your best. You know that there's some history tied into this. You've always wanted to do real estate, so it's not like you're going to jump ship right away. This is something that you are passionate about, and what drives you the most is that as long as you're able to give it your all and people are transformed through that experience, that's what makes you want to keep coming back for more. And like, I've kind of thought about this myself, but a lot of the time, like, you work your hardest on something, and in the moment it might seem like the thing that you want, but what that ends up leading you to is what you ultimately want. But you can't get there until you actually hunker down and get in the trenches and get your hands dirty. And so
Yeah.
life is a constant state of transformation. And I think a lot of our viewers here, they want to be able to hear that. They want to know that, all right, even though you started off in one space, doesn't mean that that's where you have to end up. And I think that's important.
Yeah. I mean, there's the Chinese proverb, I believe, and maybe it's misquoted, I don't know, but it's something to the degree of, journey of 1,000 steps starts with the first one, something like that. It's like to the viewers who are listening, who feel that, like, that sort of bubbling up of greatness, like there's something more, there's something beyond, college degree, get a job, get a promotion, house, kids, yada, yada. You're right, there is, but that's only true and possible is if you go take some steps, like starting to educate yourself or get inspired on videos like this, hopefully, or go read books, or go find a mentor to help you kind of identify some of those areas where you can achieve that goal in that life. It really starts with that action of taking those first steps, and then taking the next step, and then the next step. Because I didn't want to be an Olympian my entire life. I started out high school rowing, trying to just like be on a team and be successful at a sport that I knew that I could be at the top of. And that just worked out that it was rowing. If it would have been basketball, it probably would have been basketball. I don't know. But, then once I made it onto the varsity team, it was like, okay, why don't I want to be captain? And then I did that. And then it's like, now I want to go to college and do this for the University of Washington. Check that box, and it was always just like one or two steps ahead. Like, now I want to win the national championship. Now I want to win it a second time. And now I want to set this erg record. Now I want to go to the national team. And it just sort of built on itself. And at some point I started to figure out, yeah, the Olympics might be a thing here, but it wasn't from day one. And it's like you said, just starting that journey, taking those first couple steps. And you may take those steps and be like, yo, this sucks, I'm not going to do this. But at least and then you can pivot in a different direction.
It's incredible. Just a couple more questions. And then you mentioned earlier that you were also with the Mark Manson thing, the blog post that you made. Are you starting your own side company outside of real estate?
Yeah. So it's called Streamline Podcasts, and we are a post-production company for podcasters. Our mission is to keep podcasters podcasting, because the average show, I think, gets to like 9 episodes on iTunes. There's like, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of shows right now, but the average one has 9 episodes, which is insane because you cannot build an audience unless you're Joe Rogan with 9 episodes.
Right.
And even him, he did that $100 million Spotify deal,
Right.
with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of episodes, right? So, anyways, our premise is like we have podcasts, putting together the back end, the post production, the editing, the uploading, the show notes, etc. Was very expensive, time consuming, and really challenging, especially for someone who was not making money out of it, but it would take a lot of time. So we were like, hey, I think we can do something better than what's out there. So we've built a system that in a very cost effective way produces a really high level result for people who want to offload their post production and focus on creating the content and getting their message out there. And we'll basically take care of the rest in probably the most affordable way that is out there right now.
I love that. There you are. You're constantly looking within yourself and figuring out different ways to kind of express yourself. And I think, with the discipline you learn from being an Olympic rower, now that spills over to like we are multifaceted. Like there's a lot of things that we can do as long as we structure our time the right way. We know what our goals are. It's like, I don't feel like your life is written for you. You kind of write your life story as you go, but as long as you dedicate yourself to becoming the best version of yourself, you start to see the different things that you also like. In this case, you're doing this streamlining podcast. Is that what it's called?
Streamlinepodcast.com. Yeah.
Streamlinepodcast.com. And how else can people find you across the web?
Yeah. So there's a couple easy ways. The first one is my website. My last name is not easy, but it's Hans Struzyna, spelled STRUZYNA.com. And then you can, from there, you can go check out all of my social links. Actually, you can go Hans Struzyna/social, and you will find all of my social links, my YouTube, Instagram, etc., on that website. And then I'm at Instagram is my the one I focus on the most, and that's at Chief Sna, which is SNAH. That's Hans backwards.
Oh, okay. I was wondering. Okay, so Chief Sna, that's Hans backwards.
My great grandfather used to carve totem poles. Hans Martin Smith, the senior, and he was a little Scandinavian German guy, short. I think he was like 5'6", blonde hair, blue eyes. So not a Native American, and growing up in Seattle carving totem poles. So he was trying to sell these things as a side hustle. And instead of signing Hans, because no one's going to buy a totem pole from a Hans, he signed him Chief Sna so that they sounded more authentic when he went to sell them.
Wow, that's hilarious. So now there's a real legacy behind that Instagram handle, Chief Sna.
Yeah, exactly.
That's hilarious. All right, well, I mean, this has been an awesome conversation. Is there anything that you want to, I guess, leave as a parting sign off to the audience, or something else you want to share?
Yeah. You look at anybody, whether it's me on this video, on this show that you're watching, or it's any of your heroes that you follow on whatever platform, and you look at their success and you're like, damn, how did they get there? I could never do that. That's way too far of a distance, right? But if you are bold and you take that first step of like, let me just read one of their books. Let me just start listening to their podcasts and just understand their line of thinking. Or I go hire a coach, because like in real estate, we hire coaches all the time. Same thing with athletics. Go hire a coach to help you start to figure some stuff out. If you just take some of those first baby steps and put a few bucks in it, some of your time, whatever the case is, that will start to amplify if you continue to do that over time, and train yourself to move towards the direction you want. And you'll find that probably not in like a month or a couple of days, but over time, a year, you will be in a very, very different place than you initially thought. And it probably would happen even faster than that, to be totally honest with you. But just be willing to take that first step.
Oh yeah, no, that's definitely incredible advice. Definitely take that first step. Don't be stymied. Don't hold yourself back. look towards mentors, find people who've kind of been there, done that, write them an email, just try to find whatever way you can. A lot of the time, mentors, I mean, if you find the right one, you kind of plead your case or reason with them. They might not even charge you right away. So there's definitely ways to kind of just finesse your way throughout life. And you just
Hmm.
kind of have to be hungry and to stay focused on the path. But no, that's definitely great advice. And I think our listeners, our viewers would definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, man. It's like I think Tony Robbins says most people overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what they can do in a decade. And I have to say that recently for myself during the coronavirus age, I got real sad for a little while with lockdown. And then I realized, like, hey, I can use this as an opportunity. And I started my podcast, I started my email list, and I started getting even more serious about my social media content. And now you go look at any of my channels and you'll see a very different thing than if you scrolled back to February. And half of them didn't even exist in February. And so you take that opportunity and just use time, dedicated effort over time on your side. And like Tony says, like, don't worry about the year, worry about what you can do over a decade. And I am now personally convinced that, the success and the goals that I want to hit are it's a foregone conclusion that it's going to happen. It's just a matter of continuing to put in the effort and the reps, just like when I was rowing. And so if you can try to adopt that same mentality of like, just be stubborn and do the work and put out good quality work or content or whatever you're going to do that helps people, like, you will get to where you want to go. It's just a matter of time.
It really is. Thank you so much for that, Hans. All right, it's been a pleasure. And I'm going to share those links that you just shared with us. So hansstruzyna.com, and that's Struzzyna, correct?
Yes, sir.
Right. And over there, if you go to hansstruzyna.com/social, you'll find all of Hans's social links. And from there, it looks like he's most heavily engaged on Instagram. So that's Coach Sna. And just follow him on that.
Chief Sna.
Sorry, Chief Sna. There you go. Chief
Yeah.
Sna.
Yeah. That's the one. Man, I really appreciate you having me on. This has been a lot of fun. Really appreciate what you're doing with your platform, and excited to help support it and engage when this comes out and when future ones come out as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I feel like, I mean, there's still a lot of story to be shared even by you, and like some of the things that you brought up, I almost want to go even deeper, but I know time is a thing. It exists. So gotta
Well,
be
we can maybe schedule another one for some time later, and we'll come back and do a deeper dive on some of those questions. I'd love to.
Oh, absolutely. So we'll do that. All right. Thank you so much, Hans. Take care.
Absolutely.